So yeah, I thought I'd share a couple of things with you. First of all, let me just share a little bit about me, because it's important in terms of the information that I just wanted to share with you today. So I'm Chief People Officer, Global Chief People Officer for a company called FDM Group. We're a FTSE 250 organisation. You may or may not have heard of us. We may work for some of your organisations, but what we do is we hire graduates. We hire from around 600 universities around the world. So we hire graduates, we hire returners to work, and we hire ex-military. And we train those people in our academies all around the world in 12 different technical disciplines, actually from very technical all the way through to business analysis and wider, broader disciplines to help programs succeed in organisations. And we have a very high diversity because of the nature of the people that we hire. But we create those opportunities for those people and we launch their careers. They work for us for a couple of years in consultancy, and 50% of them go on and work in those organisations in the future. So it's a brilliant organisation for that. And for organisations, we're helping to create business-ready skills for the future. So I was really interested to join this organisation because my background is 18 years in corporate multinational. I then moved into the public sector and I was Chief People Officer for the Home Office. And I moved to this organisation in April. And part of it is around how can I leverage a different way of creating talent into organisations and having a conversation about resourcing that takes into account what is happening in the future of work, the dynamics of a changing organisation structure, and how we actually optimise all of those individuals, every single individual in an inclusive environment. So we're finding those individuals, we're helping them to be business ready, but that's what I'm ultimately interested in. So just put some context around some of the things that I was going to share with you today. And I just wanted to touch a little bit to begin with on some context around the future of work based on some research. I know you will have heard this in a few other presentations today, and I heard a couple of bits as well, so hopefully it resonates. But I'll just put that into context. And then I was just going to share with you two concepts or ideas that you might want to take away with you when you're thinking about how do I promote the human experience and how do I promote this in terms of us getting very proactive about this in the way that we resource and plan for investment in our people in organisations. So that's what I'm going to cover. So in terms of the future of work, when I was at the Home Office, we conducted a piece of research, very interested in what was going on. But of course, you will be well aware there's so much literature about this. There's lots of published literature. There's lots of thought pieces on websites and blogs and everything all of the time. So we worked with Cranfield and the Institute of Employment Studies to do a meta-analysis, to actually take all of that research and to say what are actually the key themes? What are some of the things that are repeatable, that are evidence-based, so that we can cut through some of the noise, because there's a lot of noise about AI and what that might mean and so on, and what are actually some of the key themes from that. So I'll very quickly run through that, and then I'll talk about the other two areas. So of course the first area is around technological advancement. So these are some of the key themes that came through of the overall research. There's not going to be anything in here, by the way, that's going to surprise you. Most of this you will be familiar with. There are a couple of nuances to it, though, that were quite interesting. But obviously, automation will continue at a faster pace, and we've heard about that. Even just the presentation that you've just heard is about how do we leverage that in our world of work at the same way that we're using it in our private lives, and how do we keep up with that such that the experience is the same in the workplace as it is outside of work. So technological advancement, clearly one. Flexibility is somewhat related to technology. I think a lot of the time when we think about flexibility, we get hung up perhaps on flexible working, and of course that's part of it, but this is really about agility. This is really about the flexibility to be able to be very responsive with our teams of people, with our skills in the workplace, to be able to move skills around, move people around, move capability around in an organisation and respond to those changes. And in addition to that, recruiting for flexibility is one of the key themes that's coming through now. So it's not just about recruiting for skills, but it's recruiting for individuals who'll be able to adapt their skills and their capabilities within your organisation as things change. In terms of people management, so obviously the skills to manage different types of contracts. So when I started my career and all through my career, the HR function is very, very much focused on, we deal with the permanent employees in the organisation, and then if we have contract or contingent labour, that's with the commercial function. And these are two separate things. And very much regulation has enabled us to stay in this space over here, because regulation kind of says, well, you better not look like you're treating them like employees, because then there's an issue. But in the future, we need to have a much more blended approach to the way that we use all different types of resourcing, because we're going to need a mix. And HR functions are going to need to get themselves across all of those different types of resources in the future, and managing these different types of contractual arrangements to make sure that we've got that flexibility and adaptability. And then we talk about intergenerational differences. So I should think most of your organisations have got 5 generations in your workforce. How do we actually manage that and manage the different requirements? I was listening to a piece of research the other day. Apparently in the UK now we're all going to live till on average we're 103. So that's good to look forward to in some ways, but what does that actually mean for our working lives? Many of the models where we're sort of taking people out of the succession plans when they start to hit their 50s and, you know, they'll finish up in their jobs into their 60s isn't going to happen. So how are we actually going to manage those workforces with that flexibility as well? There's a couple of other things in there in terms of well-being focus as well, which I think has been touched on in the last presentation, so I won't talk about that too much. Then in terms of societal, obviously globalisation continues, that doesn't change, and this pace of communications and our ability to handle it is only going to increase as well. And then again, this sort of also references on the societal side, the piece around different types of employee contracts and so on. So there's a very, very brief run through that. We actually produced a whole report, but there's a whole series of information out there. This is not different to some of what you will have seen, but contextually, for us, I feel very strongly that for a people profession, we not only need to observe some of these trends and understand them, but we need to be the people focusing on some of the solutions. And the reason for that, I've lost my auto cue down here, so I'm going to have to turn around to look for the slides. So one way of thinking about the evolution of workplaces is that, you know, traditionally, way back in the day before the Industrial Revolution, we would have been very holistic in the way we worked. High processing skills, high human skills. This would have been the cottage industries where people would have relied very much on working the process themselves, as well as being able to have great human interactions in order to create the mechanisms for doing that work successfully. We then moved into the processing age. So you know, en masse, we were processing things, we automated things, and humans were producing that process. But we had very little requirement for some of the relational skills or capabilities at the same time because it was all about the process. We then moved into the knowledge age. So we had a kind of a medium requirement for human skills, but we were very, very focused on the task. So people could be task focused. So we had medium skills for human relations skills and medium skills for processing. What AI will now be doing, and it's not about the future, it is happening now, is that because AI will be taking on some of that knowledge work, we're now in the relational age, where really is the very unique nature of human beings that we have available to us. And when people talk about, oh, AI is going to take all of the jobs, yeah, it's going to make a difference to the way that we work. But I think it's a really, really interesting time, and particularly for us if we sit within people professions, because we're now free of the process and we're free of some of the knowledge work, and we've got the ability to move into the things that have made human beings uniquely successful as a kind of a species on our planet, which is creativity, innovation, social connection, and all the different things that are uniquely human about us. So it's about harnessing those things. The question mark is, where do we go after that? But this is where we're at now. So another quick way of looking at that would be, you know, if you think about skills in terms of their capability over time, you know, processing skills have had a peak and they're now reducing, and human relations skills are increasing. And so in terms of what that means, and this is a little bit related to some of what Josh was saying about, well, how do we get fully interactive with the tech? It's not about a handoff between a human being and technology anymore. It's actually about the connectivity, the integration between what technology does and what humans do. So that's something we need to understand and respond to, and also the human-to-human connection. So these were the things that were coming out of the research very loud and clear, and the things that I think as a profession, the human resources profession or the people profession needs to be absolutely in front of. So there's a couple of things I just wanted to talk to you about now that I'm using and starting to talk to people about in terms of the proactivity of this. And the reason this is important is because if it's about the uniquely human nature of what we do and what we bring, that's about the success of our organisations now and how we optimise that, then we have the ability to influence that in a way that we haven't in the past because of our understanding of human dynamics and how that works. But I think you'll probably agree with me if you've worked in this area or if you're here today and you're interested in this, that how we create the investment decision for that is always really, really hard because you're always battling for the money to be proactive because we have to make the business case for it. Well, I just wanted to share something with you that I'm using. So I've got to find a new name for this, but at the moment I'm calling it the Human Employee Investment Continuum. So my argument would be, here's a person, and it costs a certain amount of money, not necessarily to employ them, so I'm not talking about employment costs and salaries and things, but the amount of money it takes for that person's experience in the workplace to be realised, right? So however they're experiencing work, it costs us a certain amount of money. So we can either be proactive about how we spend that money, or we can be reactive about how we spend that money, but it's going to get spent. On average, it's about the same amount of money. I'm just going to change that to an actual human being, because it's really, really important in this debate, because we're not stick people. And that's why I don't really like the term human resources, because I don't think of us as resources. We're actually human beings with a very complex physiological structure that benefits from us thinking about proactive investment rather than reactive investment, and I'll talk a bit about why that is. So the types of things I mean when I talk about proactive investment are things like communication, trust, rest, tailored benefits that respond to the actual human being, that aren't vanilla for people, so they actually respond to that particular individual, fair and transparent reward, growth opportunities, and feeling heard is a way of proactively investing in a human being. How do we create the space, the energy, and the financial conditions for an individual to experience these proactive things? The reactive things we'll all recognise because we probably spend quite a lot of our time doing them. Grievances, complaints, tribunals, low engagement scores, or mediocre engagement scores. Or what about that group of people that you'll get back in your engagement survey every year that are kind of, I'm in the middle, I haven't said I'm loving it, I haven't said I'm hating it. And we always look at that, don't we, and think, oh, that's the swing vote, if you like. But every year they're in there somewhere. How do we create a more positive experience for those people? Because those low engagement scores have a cost associated with them in terms of productivity. And a couple of other things in there in terms of the responsive things we do on well-being as opposed to the proactive things. So, if you spend a little bit on proactive, you're going to end up, in my argument, spending your money in the reactive space. You're going to have to spend more over there if you don't spend it proactively. So then my counter-argument would be, if you spend it proactively, over the other side of the kind of the seesaw, you will need to spend less of it reactively in that space. And then I think there's another kind of element to this. So it's not just about that line at the bottom, that money at the bottom. Because we're human beings, and because of the way that we respond to things and we feel, that money isn't just that money. There's a multiplier effect, because if the individual is in the space where you're spending reactively, then there's an impact on time, because they're involved in having to spend their time involved in these processes on the reactive side as opposed to the proactive side, where they're not having to think about it because it's handled for them. Lost advocacy, so that might be around engagement. It might be that your employees are part of your brand. They're certainly part of your employer brand, so that lost advocacy is worth something to your organisation. And the stress impacts, the health impacts on that person, and then all the people around them. So I would argue that it's not just the cost along the bottom that balances out, but there's actually a multiplier effect if we don't look at this proactively. So, and there are measures that we can put around those things, certainly on the right-hand side in terms of the reactivity. So that's how I'm talking about this with my organisation, and it's how I'm talking about this with some of our clients at the moment. How do you get more into the proactive space? Because I guarantee you, you will more than double your saving or your investment if you're focusing on that and not focusing in the reactive space. And in terms of us as a profession, as a people profession, I just question, having spent, I spent a lot of my time doing this in my career, but is that where I want to be? I don't think it's my best value place. I can add a lot more value here, and I think there's an opportunity cost if we're not there, because I would argue that you could actually create the other multiplier effect in the other dimension if you shifted it around, because you'd have increased advocacy and a lot more engagement from employees. So that's one thing I just wanted to touch on, which was all around the investment continuum and how we create the environment and lead the discussion about the human at work and how to proactively invest in them. The second thing I just want to touch on that I feel passionately about is strategic workforce planning. There's loads talked about this. It's hugely part of how we create clarity in organisations for the way in which we structure organisations. And again, we sort of manage costs, but we think about it in the future. I've done this in a really simplistic way because I could probably talk about this on its own for 20 minutes. But increasingly, I was in a breakfast meeting yesterday in Glasgow with a number of our clients talking about this, talking about how you get ahead of the game in terms of resource planning, and it's not just about money. So when in an organisation, I would expect a leader, and whether you're a leader of 5 people or a leader of 500,000 people, it's the same question, which is, where am I today and where am I going? Can I answer that really swiftly in 3 bullet points? And do I know why? Because if I know all of that, and it's really hard for people to answer that, but if I know that, that's great. The second part is then what's the work that needs to get done? So the basis of organisational design. If I know where I'm going, what's the work that gets done today and what work do I need to get done tomorrow? If I know the answer to those 3 things, I can then look at 5 lenses for defining the future state. So my argument is this is more systemic. So ordinarily, we'd look at FTE, we'd look at headcount, we'd look at budget, and we'd say, what's the work that needs to get done? How much budget have I got today? How much budget have I got tomorrow? Oh, I'm a victim, I can't do anything because I've got a 10% pay cut to take, so I can't do anything. Well, actual fact, but we've committed to all these other things as well in our human experience in the workplace. So we've also committed to diversity representation, but we don't think about it until down the channel somewhere, so we probably won't make a difference. My argument is bring it more upstream in these conversations, because we've made these commitments. We have to be thinking about how we strategically plan for that diversity representation shift. The same on geography. So again, making sure that the decisions that we're making around geography don't adversely affect some of the other things we're trying to do. Skills is my 4th lens. I've always found it really, really hard to get business leaders really pinned down on exactly what are the skills in your future state, so I can help you build them and I know what the delta is between today and tomorrow. So being able to describe that really clearly is really important. And the 4th one is well-being. If we're serious about well-being in the workplace, it needs to be part of our strategic workforce plan. So if we know where we are today and the data behind where we want to be tomorrow, what does good look like against all of those 5 lenses? We've only got 4 levers that we can pull. So we can resource, we can bring people in, we can grow the people that we've got. That arrow should be facing the other way, that we can exit. So there's ways of people leaving the organisation, and we can retain people in our organisation. We actually don't have any other levers than that. But within those levers, there's all kinds of blended solutions that we can come up with. But again, I would not start with that. I wouldn't start with, oh, right, I need particular skills. Let me just straight away reach for the resourcing. Let me understand exactly what I need to do across all 5 lenses, because that will influence how I resource. If I want to make a difference to my gender split in my organisation, and I've got the opportunity to bring in some new skills, I might not just go straight for my normal permanent resourcing plan. I might actually do something like a returnships programme blended in with that, and that will help me manage that. So it's a really simplistic example, but in terms of just quickly running through it, that would be it. And then my final thing I wanted to say, because I'm out of time. So they're the two things I wanted to share, the investment continuum and the strategic planning 5 lenses model that I'm using. And I just want to say that for leaders in this new human world of work, we have a responsibility to make sure that leaders are doing 2 things really well. One is setting direction and creating clarity, and the other one is getting out of the way and getting in amongst the organisation and allowing that human creativity to blossom. And that was everything I wanted to share with you, so I hope that was interesting. Thank you.